Hey guys, Mustache Tom here to review the movie Spider-Man: A Brand New Day. This is going to be a spoiler review. I repeat that, a spoiler review for this movie. So if you have not seen it yet, then go and do so, unless you don't care about having details spoiled. Of course, this will be released the day after because I actually have respect for movies. Unlike most other YouTubers who get to post, and pre-watch content and review it before or on the day of. I think that's a shitty practice that had needed to die years ago, but here we still are. People still do it, and it's still dog shit. Anywho, so let's just dive into the spoiler review of Spider-Man: Brand New Day. Now, essentially, this movie picks off sort of where Spider-Man's journey last left off, meaning that it is taking the events from the previous movie in which Spider-Man's identity as Peter Parker was lost to everyone as a consequence, including his loved ones, MJ and Ned. He even narrates as such in the opening sequence, and he still holds one of the devices left over from Iron Man called Evie. So he decides that instead of all that he's going to focus on his job. We then get a montage where he fights some generic but classic Spider-Man villains such as Scorpion and Tombstone, and even takes down the Hand. And just to say this right now, everybody, at least from what I was seeing, was saying, oh, those shots of the Hand, when he's finding the Hand, there's always going to be someone else there. Nope. Every one of those shots is just accurate to what happens in the movie. Womp 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 womp. Anywho. So, after doing some creative shots of his web swinging and whatnot, we then follow this tank that is driving through. And it is also being followed by one Frank Castle. But then, as this this attack seems to proceed, this being, who we don't know yet, who has the ability to seemingly warp from mind to mind, which should be a hint of who it is early on, is seemingly working their way through this environment to do something. And we assume it's something nefarious, or at least that's what Spider-Man assumes. They are currently after VMAX, excuse me. But we do get a brief cameo, I suppose I would call it, from the Black Widow, Natasha. We meet this new director of defense, or whatever the building is called, who hired on the Hand as a part of his defense planning. After Parker visits that, we see that he's going to start revisiting Ned and visiting MJ. Now, I found this to be a little confusing moving forward, in that in the previous movie at the end, he did call himself, or refer to himself as Peter. So seemingly they just know him as Peter. Though other times he introduces himself later in this very movie as somebody else and just gets away with it. Yes, there are issues with this movie. It is bizarre. And it makes the movie feel a little inconsistent in terms of, like, what events they're trying to take and what ones they aren't. But I digress. We get a few flashbacks. The first set with MJ and the second set with his mom. But things are progressing in such a new and scary way as his webs start to come out in a different way, more akin to a spider. And indeed, this makes it proceed so that he could remove the web shooters that he's traditionally used up until this point. But, unfortunately, Scorpion was released as a part of that mind attack, as it were. So Scorpion's back at it again. And this time around, with these newfound powers, Spider-Man easily overpowers Scorpion up until the point where he even almost kills a cop. He sees this as a problem, so he figures he knows Bruce Banner, so he's gonna talk to Bruce and talk to him about an inhibitor. This inhibitor, we'll call this the McMuffin of the movie. Boy, oh boy, does this McMuffin become extremely convenient, I will say. He gets it to work on himself. I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit. And then later in the movie, it's just going to be capable of working on anybody, including our antagonist of the film, the mind person that we don't know yet, in terms of context and order of events. So, the mind person, speaking of, finds him again. And even knows his identity. Knows the relationship between him and MJ. And he rushes over, obviously, to MJ. Now, he had figured out this part in the movie, which is another plot hole, I think. Peter, using his suit, figures out the distance that this character, whoever it is, we don't know yet, is able to jump from mind to mind. And he approximates that the distance that the mind jumping ability works is around 30 feet or so. So, typical movement in Dungeons and Dragons movement, the full movement, if you're a fan of D&D. So, Peter wisely gets this individual up on, who is currently in the control of this mind jack person, up in this helicopter beyond 30 feet from anybody, so you would think that person is stuck there. Well, no. It would turn out that when he goes to get to MJ, that somehow, by plot convenience and plot hole, mayhaps again, that this mind person somehow gets into MJ from where she was last positioned. And it is only here in this portion of the movie, when after this happens, where Peter sees the person after nearly giving up, or actually explicitly giving up. That person being Jean Grey. That's right, Jean Grey is the antagonist, and I say antagonist intentionally. You know, we're going to talk a little bit more about Jean, but Jean is such a bizarre pick. First of all, it's a different interpretation of Jean, obviously. It's a different actor, significantly younger. It's, Sadie Sink from Stranger Things. And I find this rather peculiar. I could be wrong, but I haven't seen X-Men in a while. I'm assuming most people haven't. That version of Jean in the X-Men, I don't remember if she was alive or dead. Because the Phoenix Force thing happens in one of the later movies, and was that when she died, quote unquote? I don't remember. But this is a different universe. In fact, it is such a different universe, and I don't know if this is in the comics or not, but this version of Jean happens to have a convenient sister who also is a telepath. Now, if the movie wanted to have a telepath that was a full-on villain, they probably would have gone with Frost. See, that's me just proving that I know that there are other telepaths in this universe, but again, I find it a little bizarre that they picked Jean, at least initially. And so we continue to follow, and the thing is with Jean's sister also being a telepath is that is what allows her to be the antagonist that she is. That's why I bring up the bizarre nature of all of this, seemingly a little bit heavy-handed in a degree of ways. But I digress in saying that eventually Frank Castle gets re-involved in this situation of sorts. And there is, around this portion of the movie, what I would call the movie's most bizarre transition, where it abruptly cuts to the attack with Hulk. Hulk comes back into the movie. Now, Jean happens to know that Hulk, I guess, was in the vicinity or went to Hulk. How did she know where Hulk was? I don't know any of these answers. Of course, a brief moment where we see Jean maybe, using a mind thing, and us seeing it through a quick, little moment where she chops through Peter, even though that doesn't work, but it still allows her to figure out where Hulk is. That alone would have been enough, but we don't get that. She just happens to find Hulk. Well, that was inconvenient. But through this battle sequence, which they have to fight the Hulk, and are trying to also stop Jean, they hit her with this inhibitor. The inhibitor that abruptly just works on anybody. Well, it doesn't work on Hulk, but that's only because of Hulk's body. If it could attach to Hulk, then it would apparently work on him as well, because it's just an inhibitor that works on anybody. Because, I don't know, fuck it, right? So, the director guy mentions this character named Sarah as this sort of idea that he remembers and he was able to influence Jean and all this nonsense. And we'll get back to that in a short due time. MJ who had been saved earlier and was with Frank for a brief moment earlier in the movie, in his hideout, reads the paper that he wrote at the beginning of the film, saying that he's Peter / Spider-Man. And they pull what I can describe as a Guardians of the Galaxy on us, in that since this is a, reset version of MJ, memories wiped and all, that this version of MJ does not love Peter. Very Guardians, which I would still argue, and maybe I need to watch, apparently, Guardians of the Galaxy 2, because apparently that one's the worst one. I would still argue that as a trilogy, it's one of the best superhero trilogies of all time. That's my take. But maybe, again, I need to rewatch the second one, I don't know. But anyway, so Spider-Man updates the Black Widow about the situation that is going on. And then we learn a little bit more about Jean, and more so about her sister teaching her about this jumping ability in the first place, and then the government happening to move in on her position and capturing her. So Spider-Man has to face off against Damage Control, and we see that the VMAX was a Vent Max. I don't get it, but I guess that's meant to be like, haha, that's her name in Stranger Things. I don't know. Anyway, in this sequence, Jean does a force field of sorts that stops pretty much almost everyone in the vicinity, showing her incredible power expanding due to her being tested on. This causes, when Spider-Man gets back to her with the new information on hand about the sister and all of that, to essentially try to convince her to stop her from doing anything actually bad. So he has to fight the Hand in the process. That's the sequence you saw in the trailer a bunch, where people kept saying that he was going to be with somebody else. Nope, just Spider-Man doing Spider-Man things and then getting his Spider-Man powers boosted. Frank gets updated by the situation, seeing the bubble from the outside, and is going to do one of the craziest snipers guns and sniper ways. Anyway, Jean shows and talks about how both her and Peter are very alike, in that with having these powers have ostracized them to the points that they are both currently at in their respective universe. But again, Frank is getting ready to do his sniper bit. Jean enters into Peter's mind. My mind. But she is met with Parker's aunt, Aunt May. I said mother earlier, aunt. Point being is that she talks about how these powers can be scary, but that there are always going to, I'm sort of jumping a little bit, paraphrasing in a way, that these things will always, there will always be people that are going to be with you in one way or another. And importantly as well, that the deepest form of responsibility is to, in a way, look out for yourself so that you can look out for others. Jean sees all of this, and Peter brings himself into it. But unfortunately, Frank takes the shot. Peter using his newfound powers to move Jean out of the way and take the shot. Of course, with the concentration broken, everybody resumes as the news of Spider-Man being gravely injured sweeps the nation of New York. So Frank figures out at this point who, Parker is Spider-Man at this point. So he has a good old talk, and he feels guilty that it was him that did that. And so that he can get out of the hospital without much a problem, Frank does himself a favor, or does Spider-Man a favor, and dresses up as Spider-Man, and gives everybody the okay, the thumbs up. He's cool. Peter watches from outside, acknowledges, and walks off. And the last moment in the context of this movie is that he finally re-encounters Ned after all this time and says hi. A pretty simplistic ending, but I digress. So there are a few conveniences and a singular plot hole and a few other issues. Ultimately, I do think that Jean is an interesting antagonist in the way that they wrote her. The whole sister thing, I think, was a little bit convenient, but they made it work okay, I would say, for what was going on. I'm not sure how this movie definitely feels like it's being like, hey, we're doing some doomsday stuff, right? We're combining different universes and all that. This Jean clearly hasn't been a part of the X-Men, but the X-Men are coming, which in its own way is going to be, I think, really confusing. But I guess that is technically for another film to figure out. As for this one, again, I do feel like there are a few issues here and there, but ultimately, I do think that the positives outweigh the negatives here. So I would brandish to say that I think Spider-Man Brand New Day is a 6 out of 10, and that's probably one of the lowest scores you're likely going to hear about this movie. But I am here to remove any sense of recency bias or any sense of it's Spider-Man, so it's automatically going to be good. Bullshit. I am here to always review movies objectively, so I don't care. I'm here to be honest. So that is exactly what I did. There you go. So Spider-Man Brand New Day, I again give it a 6 out of 10. That still means it's more positive than negative. There you go. And with that, that is my spoiler review of Spider-Man Brand New Day. And if you ended up enjoying this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. One, head you over to my petition to help smaller YouTubers. Second, to my PayPal, you can help support me, my channel directly. And third, to my Discord server, you can join Club Shill, do all that cool stuff for free. And until next time, everybody, bye-bye.